Good morning, and thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Lawrence Berliner. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law. I have offices in Westport and Guilford, Connecticut. Thank you for joining our ongoing Zoom webinar series, Empowering Parents in this challenging time of COVID-19 and how to navigate the road ahead. We are having a series of webinars, and my co-sponsor and co-host is Jane Faherty, who's the director of the JumpStart program at the Stamford JCC. She's a special education advocate. She's also the director of the Jewish Community Center's Community Relations as well. She's a self-described facilitator for birth to three programming and birth to three providers. In addition, we have a very special guest joining us. Or a not so special guest.
Just guest, regular guest.
Christine Lai. Christine Lai is the co-director of the Special Education Legal Fund, otherwise known by the acronym SELF. And I accidentally ran into Christine's program about a year, maybe 2 years ago, and ever since I've been so excited that there's a resource like Christine as a human being. She has a lot to say and writes a lot about special education and the fundraising efforts that she's engaged in order to help families advocate for the rights of their children with disabilities. So what we're going to do is discuss several topics, starting with Christine and the SELF program. We'll be discussing PPT meetings in this period of time of the COVID-19 school closures, what may be going on now and into the future. And also we want to talk about summer programming. We want to talk about extended school year. Jane is going to provide an update on summer camps that she has. We're supposed to get some updated guidance from the State Department of Early Childhood. Commissioner Beth Bai is supposed to release some additional guidance on summer camps and summer programming. So we may have breaking news during this webinar, or it may come out later today. We just don't know. So without further ado, I would like, I'd like to go through a couple of procedural items. I have to give a disclaimer. This webinar is being recorded so we can distribute it for future broadcasts or send it to those who have registered for the webinar. The information provided during the webinar does not constitute specific legal advice to you or your child's circumstances, and should not be relied upon as such. The webinar does not establish an attorney-client relationship with me, Attorney Lawrence Berliner. And because you've signed up for the webinar, we're going to provide you with information about future webinars and events from the Stamford Jewish Community Center, the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner. Please note that this is a Zoom platform, and the Zoom platform is a third-party provider and is not an agent or associated with the Jewish Community Center, SELF, or the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner. We appreciate questions and encourage questions, and what we would like you to use, if at all possible, is the Q&A format at the bottom of the computer screen, not the chat, but you can use the chat. The problem is because this is being recorded, the Q&A is not recorded, whereas the chat is recorded. So if you're concerned about privacy, if you're concerned about a permanent record of your questions, use the Q&A format instead of the chat. We will, at the end of this webinar, we'll be talking about our next webinar. We have another one next week, and I'll be providing some additional information. If you need to get a hold of me, and I've asked Christine and Jane to provide their contact information, and we will be providing this as part of our email response to those who have registered. But my website is Berliner Special Ed Law, BERLIN specialedlaw.com. And I'm also maintaining a Facebook page, which is found at www.facebook.com/Berliner Special Ed Law. And we provide a lot of updated information to families and who's ever reading our Facebook on articles affecting the rights of families and their children with disabilities, announcements from the state and federal government, and other items that are useful, especially in this highly unusual situation called the COVID-19 health emergency. So without further ado, I'd like to have Christine, she can give a little background about herself, how she got into the self business, so to speak, her and other,
salient
her life that that she finds interesting and inspiring as the director of self and as a parent.
Well, thank you, Larry and Jane, so much for having me. I really appreciate, this opportunity to, to talk about self and what we have been up to for the last couple of years. I am not a attorney or an advocate. I'm not a professional anyway in this field. What I am is a parent of a child that is on the autism spectrum. And so I myself went through this process firsthand when my son was, 4 going on 5. And that process really, was a difficult one, as it often is for many parents. And, a few years ago, inspired myself and my co-founder, Ulrika Drinkall, to start Special Education Legal Fund. And what we were really trying to do at the time was, level the playing field. There are so many families that don't have the knowledge or the resources or, sometimes the inclination to fully advocate for their children. And Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide families with resources, mainly with the funds to secure a special education attorney for their advocacy process. And after we started in 2018, we are in our second year of providing grants through the legal assistance program. And generally speaking, we provide grants to a maximum of $5,000 to families that reside in Connecticut or Westchester County where the student has an IEP. This program has been in place and, as I said, for 2 years, and we've been really gratified and, and thankful, not only for the families that have chosen to reach out to us as a resource, but also to the support that we've received from the special education community, particularly in Connecticut, attorneys like yourself, Larry, advocates like yourself, Jane, and the schools and, and families that are in Connecticut. We've been really very, very grateful that, that we've been accepted as a resource for the community. After we, it's not just about money a lot of the time. So after we founded the legal assistance program through which we were providing grants to families, we discovered that, sometimes families don't know what they don't know, so we began the process of trying to provide informational resources to families through either parent education seminars or through training seminars at various other nonprofit organizations and agencies in Connecticut. A lot of times we would meet with a particular nonprofit organization and, they might serve the same cohort. They might serve the same clients, but they might not have a knowledge base in special education. So they would have families that would come to them and say, I have a PPT meeting next week, and the client support, the social worker, whoever, would say, I don't know, and would not be able to provide support. So we've been trying to provide a base level support for these nonprofit organizations, at least with regard to how to get to this next level of resource and knowledge. As part of that, one of the things that we realized was that for families that don't speak English as a first language, this is a particularly daunting process. And the level of knowledge that's available in, various other languages other than English, it was relatively sparse. So with the help of Fairfield County's Community Foundation, at the end of 2019, Special Education Legal Fund was able to launch Proyecto de Educación Especial, which is really a groundbreaking program we developed. Attorney Berliner was very, very helpful and generous with his support and advice during that process. And we developed this curriculum that was designed specifically for families that speak Spanish as a primary language. And this was a curriculum, a 3-part curriculum that really focused on, special education, communication, and civics, that was being taught directly to these families in their nonprofit and agency partners across the state. So far, we've had 3 or 2.5, I should say, sessions. The first at Building One Community in Stamford, the second at the Boys and Girls Club in Stamford at the Yearwood Center, and the third, the half, was at Ableist in Stamford, which unfortunately we had to close down with the advent of the COVID-19 crisis and the cessation of kind of in-person teaching models. We have 2 more that are sessions that are scheduled, that are kind of on deck for the summer. One of them is scheduled to be at Domus with the support of the Stamford Public Schools, which we're really excited about. And the next one is going to be at Make the Road in August in Bridgeport. And that's another program that we're really, really excited about. And we're excited to have the partnership of both those organizations. But that's what we do in a nutshell. Oh, and the final thing that I was going to mention is that in the middle of April, we launched the COVID-19 Fund, the Self-COVID-19 Fund. And this is a program that differs slightly from our core grants program, in that while our core grants program is a program for families that have been, where their child has been denied FAPE for, generally speaking, like a number of years, for a period of time. The COVID-19 program is a program that we saw the need for when this crisis happened, where families may have been moving along, on a relatively satisfactory basis with their child's, education plan, but due to the advent of the crisis, are now experiencing difficulties with either the development, the delivery, or the maintenance of their child's IEP program. And so we launched this program with the support of Fairfield County's Community Foundation. This program is available to families in Fairfield County only, and it is available to families to secure the support of either a special education attorney or a special education advocate, which is a difference with the principle with the main program. And really, it's to help families get over this sort of the obstacle that is being presented by the current crisis, and to help families advocate a little bit more fully for their children as part of this, this crisis. So that's our story. I mean, it's, it's been a tremendous couple of years, and we've been really grateful that we've been able to, do the good that we can to, as many people as we can, hopefully for as long as we can. So that's what we've been up to. And thank you so much again, both of you, for having me this morning.
Well, you're a very critical part of this advocacy process for parents of children with disabilities. You mentioned that there are 2 grant programs, one, your general grant program, and the other one you just mentioned a moment ago for the COVID-19 for Fairfield County parents only. Are there any eligibility criteria?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. So for the core grants program, actually the eligibility requirements are quite similar. The program is open to families who are below 300% of the federal minimum poverty line in Connecticut. That for family of 4, that's just about $76,000. The student must have a current IEP, and the family, the programs differ in their geographic spread. As I said, the COVID fund, because of the nature of the funding base, is eligible only to families in Fairfield County. But the other program is available for families, on a statewide and into Westchester County.
Do you support families with 504 plans or just IEPs?
We have not supported families with 504 plans at the moment. Really, it's a resource, kind of allocation question. Mm-hmm. And, we have limited resources, obviously, and we have, a responsibility to help as many people as possible. Not that, families with 504 plans don't deserve help, but, as you both know, the legal protections around a 504 are not quite as significant as, as exist with an IEP plan. So kind of to maximize the success of, the dollar support that we have, and the, the limited resources we've chosen to, focus our support on students with IEPs.
Does it matter how long the child's had an IEP for in order for the parents to apply and be eligible for your support?
Not really. Really, it's a matter of, because FAPE can have been denied mm-hmm. by the IEP being denied, so it doesn't matter if the, we have had families that, that have come into the program where, the child has had an IEP since, since birth to 3. And, and has experienced, 10 years or whatever of, of delays and FAPE denials, despite having the IEP. We've also had families that, just had the IEP, instated for them. So it really, we look at everything on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, we tend to fund, around 3 to 4 grants per month, depending on what the, the funding situation mm-hmm. is. The way that families apply, I didn't talk about this, but, just to forestall any further questions, the way that families would apply is that they would email me, and I had put my email on the chat to everyone, that they would email me, and I asked them to answer the 3 questions that I just laid out, which is, the income level, number of, family members in the household, whether the child has a current IEP, what district you reside in. And then sometimes I ask for, the families to, really summarize what their goals are, kind of in the short and the medium term and the long term for this, for this action. Sometimes, the grants are $5,000. In the core program, which sounds like a lot, but as we all know, when you get into the world of, lawyers and, and that type of thing, it's not. So, some lawyers, can charge, $400, $450, $500 an hour, for their services. And, if you're looking at that in that context, $5,000 doesn't go very far, so, what we try to do is, if I have a family that, comes to me, they just had an IEP instated and they are looking for, an outplacement. That's a difficult thing to, to effect with the resources that, that I have to bring to bear to the situation. So if I have a family, in that situation, unless there's something that, is kind of off the wall that, that I don't know about. So in that particular situation, I might suggest to that family to, to start part of the process themselves, to start, to get their, they have their evaluation, to request an IEE, to start that process. And then because families can do that themselves, sometimes with great effect. And then once they've gotten through that process or gotten that process started, it becomes a little bit more effective to bring in an attorney later on, if you understand what I'm saying. So that, because I never want to have a family start the process and get into a situation where, you know, they can't finish it. You know, there's definitely things that, you know, that we can all do on our own, and, you know, and try to move that process along. Now, obviously this doesn't work. You know, Larry, I know you know of many families in which, you know, they were not able to, you know, to get to that, you know, get that IEE without the intervention of an attorney or an advocate like yourself, Jane. But I do often try to suggest to families to, you know, do as much as they can before coming to the program, because like I said, the resources are limited.
Well, that's where the training programs you've mentioned can be so helpful, heading off problems before they become problems, or keeping small problems small and manageable rather than ending up in a due process hearing or worse.
I think one of the things, Jane, and I, you know, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, you know, a lot of times, you know, I find that families tend to try to communicate with the school like as if the school is a person. You know, so when you are trying to share your problems with a person, you know, you go and you talk to them and you share your problems, and they talk to you, and you try to come to some kind of resolution that way. And people forget that the school is not a person. You know, it is an institution, it is an agency, and it has a process all of its own. So I have many cases where, you know, the family went, they shared their concerns with the school, you know, with the teacher, you know, maybe forgot, you know, maybe, you know, it was the end of the day, they were doing a bunch of things, it wasn't sent an email, you know, lots of things happen. But the family feels like they've shared their problem. And then when they don't have the corresponding response, then they start to get frustrated. And that begins a kind of frustration spiral with the district, which really could be alleviated if we all sort of, you know, rejiggered the way we think about, you know, this relationship. You know, they're not your friend, you know, and we all need to talk about, you know, we need to use email, we need to communicate, you know, on paper, and, you know, and we need to, you know, and we need to be, follow up and just keep, you know, and keep being persistent about our communication. But I find that happens a lot with families, and I'm sure you do too.
But this goes back to what Larry and I have been talking about, which is documentation. It's not just documentation of your child's progress, but keeping a record and following through on conversations you may have had with a member of the PPT team or the teacher or a professional working with your child. If as a parent you have a conversation, you bring a concern to their attention, follow that dialogue up afterwards
with an email
and communication, whether it's an email, whether it is a handwritten letter, whatever your most accessible form of communication is and you're most comfortable with, follow through in writing, because unless it's in writing, it didn't necessarily take place maybe you perceived it to have taken place. But also be considerate when you are writing the tone and the tenor of the language you're using in your letter and communication, because it's then immoralized in print.
Yeah.
But written form and following conversations up in writing and with letters keeps all of us accountable for conversation and things that we've discussed and we shared. So that would be, I know from my experience as an advocate, that's something I always recommend. And I'm sure, Christine, as you as a parent, and in talking to parents, that's also something that you
as well. And it's important now, particularly in the, you know, in the midst of this, you know, of this school closure period, that, you know, I'm always a big proponent of emails. I tell people to email all the time. You know, like you see them in the hallway, you email right afterwards. You send an email, they don't respond, send another email with the first email attached, you know, that whole thing. But right now, it's so important to be collaborative that, you know, I totally take your point about, you know, the tone in a written email, you know, because, you know, it's so hard to control that tone. So, you know, if it's possible to, you know, to speak on the phone with your teachers during this, you know, this crisis, I think that's a, you know, that's a great option if you have it, and then follow up with an email, because, you know, it's always, you know, it's so much better if you can deliver that message, you know, like face to face like this, or over the phone, and then follow up with, you know, your email listing, you know, whatever your concerns are, and, you know, whatever else. And also it's important not to, to point out the good things that are happening too. I mean, this is not necessarily all like, doom and gloom, and teachers don't always want, and administrators don't always want to hear like the laundry list of things that like, that you disagree with, or, or don't like, or, are having problems with. They also want to hear, I think, that things are going well in certain circumstances.
Well, teachers, just like children, like positive reinforcement.
Exactly.
We all feel good about ourselves, and we tend to do a better job when we feel like we're doing a good job. But just to quickly say, so when I write letters to districts or to families, I always get a second set of eyes to look at my letter or my correspondence, and I ask my high school children, what feeling do you get from this communication? Because I want my communication to be factual and not to necessarily be emotional.
Right.
So I always get somebody to have a second look, check grammar,
that's a great idea.
But also to check the sentiment and the feeling that I'm eliciting and communicating, because you want to collaborate and form a meaningful, potentially long-term relationship with this team and these individuals.
Absolutely.
Those are excellent points. And if you do, and I agree, if you do even have a phone call or a conversation or a meeting, you can follow up. It can be a thank you for your time, speaking to me about my child, because parents are the teachers. The home is the school. Yeah. The teacher is not walking up and down the classroom to see what the child is working on, or whether he or she is focused or not. And especially today, parents are a critical, vital source of information as to whether this online instruction is working, because the school may be providing learning opportunities, but that doesn't translate necessarily to students learning, because some online learning is perfectly fine and some online learning is not. I've had, for example, one parent tell me about her son who was doing reasonably well in a classroom setting because there were external supports, prompts, a way to keep the student focused, but sitting in front of a computer screen, her son just, zones out after 15, 20 minutes. I said, then let the school district know that. They wouldn't know that unless you're telling them, because they're not sitting next to your child, seeing how he is or is not performing. So the ongoing communication that Jane talked about and Christine is vitally important. And it can be a phone call with a follow-up email or note or an email, and flexibility, collaboration, cooperation in these very difficult times. It's difficult for families, but I point out it's also difficult for many of the schools, public or private, who are doing their best to provide an education during this period of time of school closure. I wanted to ask Christine, are there certain expenses that are or not covered by a self-grant?
Generally speaking, the self-grant would not cover the cost of, now we haven't had this, as an issue, but I'm just throwing this out there, of like expert testimony, for example. If a neuropsychologist or other provider was required to come to a PPT meeting or a due process hearing or mediation to to speak about the report or the progress or what they'd observed about a child, we generally wouldn't cover that that kind of cost. The grant is generally intended for the special education attorneys fees in the case of the main grant program, and the special education attorney or advocates fees in the in the COVID grant program.
So we've had another question, Christine. Is it only for Fairfield County and Westchester County, or for all Connecticut families?
So the main grant program, the legal assistance program, which provides grants of up to $5,000, is eligible for Connecticut as a whole and Westchester County. The COVID-19 program is for Fairfield County only.
And there's another question here, Christine, this would be good for you to answer from a parental perspective. Advocating from your child as parent can be such a daunting task. Most parents do not have an education background. What resources can you recommend to a parent to be able to prepare and advocate for your child in a PPT meeting? If you can look back to the beginning of your journey, what did you do?
That's a great question. I love understood.org. That is a great website where, here I can put it on the thing, it's understood.org. And that's a great website that provides a lot of like form letters. You know, there are different topics for different, you know, children with ADHD, children with autism, you know, children with dyslexia. So they have a lot of things kind of, you know, a lot of resources for a broad, you know, spectrum of, you know, of needs. And, you know, I really like the form letters that they have. Like, you know, I would like to request an IEE. What language do I use? And you could just pull that language out, you know, copy it onto your email or your, you know, or your Word document, replace the, you know, the necessary language and use that, you know, use that. So that was one of the first resources that I used. I also like, you know, the COPA, which is the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. I always get that wrong. Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, COPA.org. And COPA is a great organization that encompasses all of the, you know, a majority of the special education attorneys and advocates on a national basis that practice on behalf of families and students. And they are great because they are on the cutting edge of all the legal developments in special education law, particularly, and civil rights law for students. They have an advocacy arm that works with, you know, that keeps tabs on what's going on a federal level. And so that's super important. When this waiver issue popped up with Secretary DeVos as the CARES Act was being passed, it was COPA that came out with a, you know, sort of a national call to action for parents, attorneys, advocates, providers, you know, call your reps, you know, call your senators, you know, make known that, you know, we don't believe that waivers are necessary, and we as parents and the community don't want waivers of IDEA to be, you know, folded into this, you know, into this legislation. So they're a great organization.
Interject, Christine, we should thank our own Connecticut Senator Christopher Murphy, who took the lead, probably inspired by COPA, and many people here in Connecticut, including myself and many others, who contacted this office to make sure that the waivers that were going to be proposed by Secretary DeVos were never proposed, and that was the outcome.
I just on a personal note, so I'm a member of COPA. I've been completing their training, their seat training.
Such a great training.
Fantastic. Such a great it's an amazing resource. And back in March, myself and other advocates and special education attorneys went down to Capitol Hill, and we lobbied senators. And we met with an agenda of covering 3 topics. One was to increase the budget for special education. Another was looking at elements of higher education and the impact that has on young adults with disabilities. And the third area is looking at seclusion and restraint and federal guidelines regarding that specific element. In going in to speak with the senator, their staffers, I shared my personal observations of seclusion and restraint within a local school here in Fairfield County. And what the senators and these officials that are supporting special education and disabilities are looking for is information and anecdotal stories that they can connect and relate to and share. Senator Murphy, I related what I saw and how that made me feel. Senator Murphy the next day, in talking to Betsy DeVos, made reference to that information. So whilst you might not feel your experience can make a difference and have an impact on a bigger scale, it actually can. And that our local senators and governors need data and statistics and numbers how to validate the experiences we're having as an individual, because you're not alone. Quite often you're not alone in your experience. There'll be others that might have had variations on a theme, And collectively, that's what lobbying is. We can make a difference on not just a state level, but on a federal level. So as well as connecting and communicating and sharing with your district and other families, don't feel afraid to connect on a broader state level and even the federal level. And organizations like COPA are a great vehicle by which to do that. And it felt very empowering to connect and to share and relate.
I'm sure that was amazing. I'm sure that was an amazing experience.
I also want to add, as far as resources, our own State Department of Education, ct.gov is the state website, has a lot of information on special education, a lot more information these days on the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just saw that last week, State Department of Education, they have a training module supporting parents and caregivers of students with high needs during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's what it's called, available on the State Department of Education website. It's a video, there are other materials. It's sponsored by the State Department of Education, the RESC Alliance, which according to Jane, doing a survey. We haven't seen the survey, but maybe Jane could touch upon that. And then the federally funded Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center, which is an advocacy organization, federally mandated as well, advocacy organization for families of children with special needs. So there are a lot of resources on the State Department of Education website. COPA is an excellent resource. Just in the land of Google, just type in your question, you're going to get understood.org or any other organization. It's just, that's the exciting part of the internet for me, is there's a lot more information readily available than ever before. Some of the law schools have information, some law firms have information. So these are, the Child Mind Institute in New York has a lot of information as well. So there's an infinite set of resource. And I just wanted to comment on that parent who felt that they did not have a background in education. I consider all of my clients to have a PhD in clinical parenting. You are an expert on your child. And I don't want any parent to feel otherwise. You don't have to have a degree in teaching, a degree in psychology, a degree in medicine, be a licensed physical or occupational therapist to be a parent. Parents have wisdom, parents have intuition, parents have experience, because prior to the COVID-19 virus, I mean, the parents would see their child in multiple situations, probably not so much in school, but since the COVID-19 virus health emergency, you're seeing your child in school. It's called your home. So parents are an especially important source of information, whether we are dealing with in-person instruction or online instruction. And I consider my clients to be experts on their children, and no one should ever tell you otherwise. I mean,
you as the parent are the most important member of the team. Nobody knows your child better than you do. And, I think that, with regard to not having a background in, in law or in, education or in advocacy, what I fall back on as a parent, and this is after, 15 years of doing this, kind of personally, and only a handful of years, in this new role, is like, if you feel like something is off, trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right to you, it probably isn't, so, that's the thing that, really for me is a guiding force in, when I'm having meetings, on behalf of my child is, does this sound like my child? Do I feel like this is reflective of my child, or, what is my gut telling me about this? I will never forget that I was in a meeting, and we were, there were, 5-6 people around the table, all of them, experts and, you know, talking about my child. And the speech therapist was speaking, and she was speaking for, you know, 5, you know, or 10 minutes. I can't remember. And it just didn't seem right to me, you know, like, I don't know what it was. Like, it didn't seem right to me. And I said, you know, and I stopped her and I said, have you met him? You know, which seems fairly obvious, you know. And she said, no, but I've spent some time with his brother. And, you know, so like, sometimes, you know, you just have to kind of trust what you're feeling, you know, in a given situation. And, you know, you know, 90% of the time, your gut instinct's probably going to be right. And don't be afraid to speak out.
That's the advocacy piece, whether you are advocates as parents or have an advocate or an attorney advocating for you. It's very important that your concerns for enhancing your child's education are communicated to the school district, especially during PPT meetings, but in the informal back and forth of telephone conversations back when we would be meeting our teachers in school at pickup time. It's very important that we have that back and forth communication. You had mentioned that you have the 2 grant programs. Do you make any specific recommendations to attorneys or advocates, or is that left up to the parents?
That's a great question. We do not make specific recommendations to, you know, to attorneys or advocates. You know, part of the reason for that is that, you know, selecting someone to work with you on behalf of your child is an incredibly personal experience. And what I say to families, you know, I try to give families a, you know, a broad overview of, you know, how attorneys and advocates charge for their services on a general basis. You know, some of them charge by the hour, some of them charge on a, you know, on a flat fee. Some, you know, I try to give families a broad view of that. But aside from that, as long as the attorney or advocate practices special education law and sort of meets our professional requirements, which are basically that you practice special education law, you know, principally, you know, the families are free to choose the individual that suits them the best. You know, some families might want an advocate who's very, very, you know, aggressive. You know, some families might not want an attorney that is very, very aggressive. You know, it's like, it's really about, you know, the sort of, you know, personal feeling that you get, the connection that you get with that person. And one of the things I always tell our clients is that, you know, you're going to spend a lot of time with this person and it won't be good time. You know, it's like highly stressful, you know, time. So you want to make sure that this person is, you know, communicates with you, gets you, talks to you in the way that you want to be spoken to. Like if you've chosen an attorney who doesn't use email and you like to use email because you have, you know, whatever, you know, that's kind of a non-starter from the get-go. You know, you have to have the same, you have to communicate in the same way, the same form of communication. And if you are, you know, you might, you know, feel comfortable with attorney. It's a very difficult process. And, you know, you want the attorney, you want to feel comfortable with the attorney. That's the most important thing. The other thing that I tell clients is that you need to speak with more than one attorney before you hire them. Mm-hmm. It's just like you, or advocate, just like you don't go out and, you know, marry the first person that you date. You know, well, maybe some people do, but I didn't. And most people I don't think did. You don't marry the first person that you date. Go out and see more than one attorney, you know, because when you are like in the situation that most families are in, and, you know, you can't share this story with anybody. Nobody understands. You know, your family doesn't understand. You don't want to talk to the other, you know, families in your neighborhood or at the school. Your friends, unless they have a kid that has special needs, they don't understand. So when you meet the first attorney that you meet and they get what you're talking about, you know, the tendency is to like breathe this enormous sigh of relief and be like, oh my God, I found the right person. But they're just the first person, you know, they might not be the best person. So, you know, try to meet with at least, you know, 1, 2, 3 people. Think of, you know, get an understanding of how they charge, get an understanding. Are they going to be like, every time I text you, are they going to charge me, $125? These are all really, really important questions to ask and to understand. So those are things that we try to help families get a sense of in the process.
And
now, just from an advocate perspective, once you find and have that person that you're working with, at that point you have to trust and develop a relationship of trust.
Absolutely.
Mutual respect and share information.
Mm-hmm.
And the advocate and the attorney are there to support you and to move your situation forward in the direction that you wish it to go in. But do not be afraid to share information. And you might consider information not to be significant or meaningful, but it actually might provide the advocate or the attorney with really valuable insight. So just know it's an open, honest, trusting relationship, and you need to share, even if things might be more challenging.
That's right. That's a great point, Jane, because I think a lot of parents, we feel like, there's a sense of shame, about, because at the root of all this, it's like, my child is having trouble in school. That's why I'm here. I'm going to all these meetings and having all these appointments because my child's having trouble in school. So, the tendency, sometimes is to feel, a sense of shame about that, even though it is not your fault. It's not your child's fault, and what you're there for is to get the appropriate support and, and scaffolding for your child. But you cannot do that without being upfront with your team about what's going on. Like if you're not, honest with your attorney or your advocate and the people that you're working with, it's really, really difficult to get the right, support in place. Plus the advocate, the attorney's not working with, 100% of the information, and that, and that's like, trying to fight a boxing match with one hand tied behind your back. It's just not going to work. So it really is important. That's such an important point to make, is to, it's like that relationship of trust and, mutual trust and mutual sharing is only going to benefit your child.
Yeah, and you might think that something is insignificant, but it can make the difference to the level of support and services a child receives. Just speaking personally, I have 4 children. My youngest was 2. Nobody outside the home could understand him. I could, the siblings could, so we didn't think there was a problem. He then was receiving speech therapy 3 times a week. The speech therapist was not making any progress or success. I then incidentally had the siblings there. She realized, like myself, they had a British accent, that my husband at the time had a British accent. And so she put those pieces together and then did a plan based upon him accessing language with a British accent. Had she not had all those pieces, she might never have gone down that track. Her assumption was my husband was American, other children had American accents too. It's a small piece of information, but it actually then opened up my child's ability to access language. And that information was then shared with the public school when he participated there. So as a parent, you might feel information isn't relevant, or you might feel judged in some way. But we're not, as advocates and attorneys, we're not there to judge. We're there to support and collaborate and share and work together. So it's about developing trust and relationship. And communication is the key to a lot of this success.
I wanted to ask Christine 3 quick questions, because we have quite a few other questions and some other topics we also want to get to this morning. And the 3 quick questions to Christine are, you mentioned there are 3 to 4 grants being issued per month. Are you accepting applications now?
We are accepting, that's a great question. So our grant cycle generally runs from October until June, which is a 10-month cycle. We close in June. So we are currently accepting applications for June right now for the core grants program. When we receive applications, we generally review all the applications for 1 month at the close of that month. So the June applications would be then reviewed at the end of June. The COVID-19 fund is, we accept applications on a rolling basis. We will write grants from that program until there's no more funding out of that program. So, that we are accepting applications for the COVID-19 program, as we speak, as we are for the core program. and so if anybody is interested in, you know, in either one of those programs, or if they're not sure which program, you know, that you can email me and we can kind of sort that out, you know, independently. You would email me for a pre-screening. You'd answer the 3 questions that I outlined before, you know, which was the, you know, the income test, the IEP, the school district, you know, and what you're hoping to kind of, you know, achieve from the action. And at the end of that, once you've emailed that information to me, then I would email the family, the applicant, an application to fill out. And then they return that to me and the process begins. Each one of the, all applicants have to submit to an interview, which is generally done with me, and you know, and they're done by phone. You know, they're half an hour long, you know, short interview via phone or Zoom or whatever.
Can you receive the grants more than once?
So families that have received a grant from SELF are eligible to apply again for the grants program. However, it's like, you know, they're eligible to apply again at the conclusion, like in a year, let's say. So if a family's approved for a grant and they receive the grant, and then the legal bill exceeds the amount of the grant, they're not eligible to apply again for that same for that same legal action, if you follow. But if they applied for a grant in 2018, for example, and their situation, their you know, their IEP is you know, their outplacement agreement is ending. You know, they have another mediation that's, you know, that's coming up because, you know, it's the end of the agreement. The family is eligible to apply again.
Next quick question. I know you apply for grants. You mentioned the Fairfield County Foundation, I think it was. Do you accept donations to SELF?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We accept donations on our website through PayPal. So our website is www.spedlegalfund.org. And if you go onto the main page, there's a button, I think it's blue, that's a donate button, and you can donate on our website that way. Or you can send us a check the old-fashioned way to our address, which is also listed on the website. And obviously all donations are tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law. Yes, we greatly appreciate the support of you know, our donors and supporters, and we could not do this without the support of the community, and you know, and all the great families and you know, and businesses and corporations that have, and community foundations that have you know, that have pitched in to support us over the last couple of years.
And my last question to Christine, you have a blog or blog post. Could you just briefly explain what you're...
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, you know, the blog is was launched this year, and really, you know, recently it's, you know, it's focused, you know, overly on this, you know, on the current health crisis, but really, you know, it was meant to bring to parents a, you know, a parent's perspective of, you know, of certain of topics that, you know, that are of interest in special education law. Our first blog was about hiring a special education attorney and that process. I talked a little bit about that here, but really it was about, you know, from a parent's perspective, you know, what do I look for? You know, what kind of, you know, individual, you know, what's the right individual to hire in, you know, a certain situation? You know, when do I need an attorney? You know, like when should I move from an attorney to an advocate, that type of thing. So these are all a couple of our other blogs. Larry, you know, Jane, I'd love for you to contribute. We have, you know, we have guest contributors to the blog all the time. I've had, you know, various attorneys that, you know, have written, you know, Michael Gilberg, who I think you know, wrote a blog about his, you know, his experience as a attorney with autism, you know, special education student, and his journey to what he does today, advocating for children with special education needs. So we are open to all kinds of topics like that. Recently, the blogs have focused on, you know, on this, you know, current crisis, and you know, kind of how how to be a parent and a teacher and a, and a data collector and a therapist, and, what one should do, while your child is at home, you have an IEP and you're trying to figure out, what are going to be the next steps once we get back to school. So those are a lot of the topics that we've, that we focused on. I have a blog post that, I expect to put up in a month or so about reading a Form 990, which is a little bit dry, and but is important for families that are looking at private special education schools, and understanding what the finances of a private and independent special education school are, how it works, and whether the school is is viable financially, because that's a big concern. There are schools, I mean, the absolute worst thing to happen is to find a school for your child that's the appropriate school, and then have them close either mid-year or in a before your child's time there is over, and unexpectedly. We actually had this happen to ourselves personally this year. My son's school in Westchester closed due to lack of funding, really running out of money. There are other special education schools that have closed in the last couple of years. Kildonan was one, and and that's a very, very difficult thing for families and for and for students that that find themselves in that position. So those are kind of the topics that we cover. It's really things that I feel like would be of interest to parents, and really drawing on a lot of our own experience as parents. But I'd love for both of you, if you're interested, to to pen an entry for the blog. That'd be great.
That'd be great. I have two questions. So first of all, it's really important, as you were saying, to find the right attorney or advocate to work with you. Do you have a checklist of questions that you would recommend that parents go through to ask attorneys before?
That's a great idea. No, I don't. That's a great idea. I should probably come up with one. Yeah, that's a really great, that's a really, really great point. And I will definitely do that, and maybe put it up on an upcoming blog.
Yeah, I know that myself, I get blonde and I have brain freeze, and I leave a meeting, I'm like, oh, I wish I'd asked. And then the second question we just had from somebody, from your perspective, how do you know when a school is appropriate for your child when you're looking at out-of-district placements?
That's a great question, and I actually have a blog post about that as well. Is one of the most important things that you can do when you are going through this process, like because there's no like list really of like what school is going to be appropriate for your child, and so in most families, like what you do is you look on the internet. There's a list of the approved special education programs on the Connecticut Department, the APSEP or whatever. That's on the Connecticut Department of Education website. Those are approved special education programs. Larry can talk about the difference between approved and non-approved programs, but so you start with sort of a list. You start, you start that list there. Then you start, you can go on Facebook. You have, friends. You kind of reach out to that network, and you get, sort of your list of schools. And then really it's about, sort of winnowing it down, using the website, talking to the school representatives, and then going on your visits, which are sort of the most important things. All these schools have open houses. A lot of them have information sessions and tours. It's really very, very important to go visit the school and like kick its tires, so to speak. It's even more important than that is to try and visit the school when there are students in session. I think that's really, really critical to really, at least, from my perspective, deciding if this is the right place for my child. If you are walking around the school and you can see your child there, you can see them sitting there at the lunchroom, and you can see them sitting outside, during break or whatever, that's going to be your best, most, that gut feel, we're back to that gut feeling. But I think that, you really cannot successfully choose a school for your child without having that visit and feeling comfortable that your child will you can see your child walking around at campus with the students that are there. The other thing that I'd point out is that just because the school is right for your child right now doesn't mean that that's going to be the school that your child's going to be right for your child in 2 years or in 3 years or whatever. You know, your child's going to grow. Your child is going to, you know, experience so much growth over a year, 2 years, 3 years time. And, you know, it could be that, you know, this school's an appropriate placement at this point. It might not be an appropriate placement in 2 years or 3 years time. You know, my son's been at 6 schools, you know, I wouldn't say that all of them were appropriate placements, but I would say that they were all, you know, steps on the path that you want to take from where you are now to where you want to be at the end of this road, you know. And I always try to think about, it's like, where's my son now? And where do I hope for him to be in the future? What's my long-term goal? Is my long-term goal for him to be back in the high school, you know, in my district high school? And how do I get to that process? Or like, you know, is my goal for him to be in, you know, like what's sort of the long-term goal? And that's an important thing to think about every step of the way. I always have like, you know, my, you know, sort of, you know, my, you know, this is where we are, this is my reach, you know, and this is my, you know, sort of DEFCON 4 plan. You know, those are my 3 plans that I work with it on any given given time. And at least if you know them and you have them like kind of articulated in your mind, you can try to, you can move relatively seamlessly between the 3 of them if the need comes up.
And also just in terms of, I'm sure that depending upon the child, the age of the child, the disabilities of your child and their needs, I'm sure that as a parent, you also talk to your children about the placement that they're in and get feedback from them too, because that's another piece of information and perspective.
Absolutely.
We have a few questions. Some are general, some are legal, so I'll just ask the questions. One parent asked, can I request a virtual PPT meeting instead of a conference telephone call? The answer is yes. The State Department of Education issued 2 letters, one on March 24th, 2020, and another one on April 24th, 2020, that discusses online, virtual, even telephone PPT meetings during this period of time of school closure. And the next part of that question is, what makes a PPT meeting legal? Well, PPT meetings are scheduled in accordance with state and federal special education laws. That's what makes them legal. So if you get a notice of a PPT meeting, you will see the purpose, the time, date, purpose of the PPT meeting, and who has been invited to the PPT meeting by the school district. And this person is asking who needs to be at a PPT meeting. The federal law talks about a minimum number of people. There's no maximum. So who should be at the PPT meeting on a minimum basis? A school administrator, somebody who can make a decision about committing the school resources, whether it's an evaluation, whether it's revising the IEP, even discussing an out-of-district placement in some situations. So at a minimum, there should be an administrator, like a principal, special ed director. There should be a special ed teacher, a regular ed teacher, if your child's attending classes in the regular education environment, possibly a school psychologist, school nurse, if there are health issues. If there are evaluation reports that are being reviewed, then whoever completed the evaluation, either school staff or private evaluator, should be at the PPT meeting.
And in some cases, the student.
That's an excellent point, especially at the age of 18, because at age 18, students are an adult under law, and they have a right to be at their PPT meetings. Starting at around age 15, students can be invited to a PPT meeting. However, it's up to a parent of a minor child to decide whether or not the student should be at the PPT meeting. Often I find students at the PPT meetings would rather be in class or somewhere else, being in a room full of adults talking about them in the third person. On occasion, I've had students provide very constructive comments and to the members of the PPT meeting, but my experience, which by no means is universal, it tends to be they would prefer to be somewhere else. Let's see.
There was one question, Christine. Are you aware of any other organizations like SELF, either in the US or in other countries, was the question.
That's a great question. As far as I know, Special Education Legal Fund is the only organization of its kind that provides direct support to families to secure legal assistance through a special education attorney or advocate. Now, that being said, I have not done a deep dive of, every state in every, but it's my understanding that that's the case. The legal systems are different in different, in different states as well. Our community in Connecticut, our special education community is a very specific community. It's very tight-knit. The attorneys and advocates that work on behalf of parents and families are a very collegial and, and well-known to one another. There are other states in which, the legal communities are a little bit more dispersed. And, there's not that's really strong sense of collegiality just, because it's just not possible. There are other states where, there are different, standards of, some states have different standards of, kind of reimbursement for legal fees. So that, changes the, New York City, kind of springs to mind in terms of how their legal system works for special education. So, but as far as I know, we are the only organization of our kind in the country, and we've had inquiries from the Netherlands, from Arizona, from all over the country. And as far as I know, we're the only organization of our kind.
Oh, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thanks.
We have a question from looks like a parent who has a PPT meeting coming up. Her child is going to be evaluated online. And what question should the parent be asking during this PPT meeting? By federal law, parents are obligated, and the schools are equally obligated to listen to the parents' concerns for enhancing their child's education. As Christine mentioned before, if something is working well, bring that up. If something is not working, bring that up as well. We don't always have to dwell on the negative, because
the other thing, Larry, not to interrupt you, but it's important to remember to talk about your child's strengths as well as the weaknesses. We can tend to get really focused on this is where my child is weak, this is where my child is weak. But a lot of times their strengths are equally as important, because you can very often use those to work around the weaknesses that they have, and that's a really important thing that I always, it's like, is your child, really, really good at, really, really self-aware and, and socially, and socially alert. You can use a lot of strengths that way to overcome some of the weaknesses and deficiencies that, your child might be trying to work through. So sorry.
Go ahead. The parent is asking again about the PPT meeting. Again, look at the April 24th letter from the State Department of Education, ct.gov. It's prominently displayed on the State Department of Education's website for COVID-19 information. The question, is the meeting legitimate? Well, if they're sending you a PPT notice, the answer should be yes. PPT meetings should be scheduled on a mutually convenient time and date. The school may have an agenda. You as the family also may have an agenda, and both agenda items or sets of agenda items should be discussed. Information can be sent by mail or by email with your consent. Another question is the provision of online speech and language or other kinds of services. Again, referring back to the April 24th memo from the State Department of Education, and a March 21st, 2020 document from the United States Department of Education. Your child, whether they're online or attending school in person is still entitled to a free, appropriate public education. That's the legal equation. Your child is entitled to an IEP based upon his or her unique needs. There should be an array of goals and objectives that take advantage of the child's strengths while addressing those areas of weakness that will allow the student to make meaningful educational progress. Because we've converted from in-person to online instruction, the free appropriate public education standard has not changed. The delivery of instruction has changed. So if you as parents are seeing, again, what's working, let the school know. Equally so, if it's not working, the online instruction is not usable, it's not accessible, it's not addressing the IEP goals, you need to have a conversation with the teacher, possibly the school administrator, and if necessary, request a formal PPT meeting. If your child is not receiving the services that are listed in the IEP, as both Jane and Christine mentioned, you need to have ongoing communication, verbally, in writing, and if necessary, at a PPT meeting in order to discuss your concerns. Some online learning, like reading instruction, speech and language may work for one child, it may not work for another child. But you are the person who's monitoring your son or daughter's progress. You are seeing how your son or daughter is doing in school, which just happens to be your home. And the school needs to hear from you, the good as well as the not so good.
I just wanted to just piggyback off what Christine said, which is really important, about talking about your child's strengths and accomplishments as well at meeting. It might also be helpful and beneficial to talk about your child's interests. If you're trying to get a child to read, they're really not engaged with the material, but to share with the team. I know from my experience with my children, reading at the beginning was a struggle. They were reading books they were not interested in. So by sharing the things that really captured their imagination and their interests, that then became the topic of the literacy, and that really sparked the interest. So I'm sure Christine.
What a great point. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic idea.
Yeah.
We have a question about transitioning from one school to the next, like elementary to middle or middle to high school. Would a PPT meeting be appropriate due to the uncertainty due to the COVID-19 virus? The answer is absolutely yes, regardless of whether we're dealing with the COVID-19 virus. You have an elementary school team that's sending a child to middle school, or a middle school team that's sending a child to high school. The receiving middle school, the receiving high school has to be able to meet your child's needs. You may have a lot of structure, fewer teachers in an elementary school, and then suddenly you go to middle school and there's a lot more change, a lot more kids in the building, a lot more transitions during the school day. How will your son or daughter adapt to that new learning environment? Very important to discuss at a PPT meeting to ensure that the IEP has and will continue to provide a free, appropriate public education. And the same is true with the transition from middle school to high school.
Or from birth to three to.
Or birth to three, another transition, that's correct. Jane might want to touch upon that. One thing we wanted to talk about was extended school year services, because this is normally and typically towards the end of the school year, we start talking about whether or not a child might need extended school year services in order to prevent regression over the summer, regression of skills over the summer, and avoid spending an inordinate amount of time recouping skills in the fall. But a lot of the in-person instruction took place in the middle of March and through the end of the school year. So one expert we were talking to the other day called it effectively COVID-19 slide as opposed to summer slide. And what he meant was, instead of the typical regression that might occur over the summer, all children, if they're not in school, regress a little bit. but he was also talking about the regression that occurs with the COVID-19 school closures. So it's vitally important to find out if the school is having a summer program. Is it going to be in person, online? If not, what are your plans for your child over the summer to continue his or her learning in order to prevent regression over the summer, to make sure that if schools are open in the fall, that he or she is ready for the 2020-21 school year. Is there anything that either want to add to ESY or summer programming?
I mean, just in terms of ESY, just be prepared for it to continue to be remote and via distance learning, and just any challenges or struggles you've had during this initial period of remote learning, please share and connect with the team, because if we continue to do this during the summer for another 4 to 5 to 6 weeks, it's important that you address what has worked, but also what hasn't worked, so that things can be tweaked and changed along the way. What might have worked at the beginning of remote learning might no longer work for your child, as they maybe become more disengaged with remote learning, their attention span is becoming more fleeting. So really share things that have worked, but also share the concerns you have, as distant remote learning might continue not only during the summer, but potentially in the fall too, as we're uncertain at this point what the school year is going to look like in the fall. So again, just share as much information as possible, so together you can collaborate, brainstorm, and come up with ideas. There was a question regarding what if your child only receives BCBA consult during the school year and during this pandemic? The BCBA has not reached out to the child at all.
That's the process of communication. I would do something, as stated before, in writing, or at least have a telephone call, call the principal, call the special ed director, call the BCBA if you have contact information to find out what is or is not happening with that service or any other service. Again, the IEP has goals, objective, accommodations, and service hours. And if the child is not receiving all the instruction on the goals and objectives, or your child is not receiving all the service hours for the goals and objectives, keep a record of that information. For example, if you're supposed to have 10 hours of special education services per week and you're getting 5, you need to keep a record of what is happening during the 5 hours that were provided, and a record that 5 hours were not provided. Because the U.S. Department of Education on March 21st, 2020 issued a policy guidance that basically said the school districts and the families are going to have to discuss later on whether compensatory education services should be provided to make up for the missing IEP services, the missing IEP service hours. And the only way you can start that conversation is by having a record of what was or was not provided, in addition to other information like whether or not the BCBA was providing services, if BCA was providing services, whether it was effective, whether your child was engaged with the services. I have parents that say, my child just cannot learn during this online format. I have one client, the child's doing remarkably well with the online instruction for the sole reason that she's not in school and doesn't have to deal with the drama that was going on in her school, so she can focus on it.
I've actually heard that quite a bit from families, particularly if the student has like anxiety. The online environment has worked out great for some of those students.
Right.
I think that's a great point, Larry. In terms of like keeping records about, how your child is progressing, I know a lot of parents get freaked out, because there's these forms and things like there's, different websites have different forms on how to track your child's, progress and behavior and, whatever. And it doesn't have to be in a form. What it should be is something that works for you. So if it's like a notebook, that you're going to write every day, like how your child has accessed the learning that day. That works for you. It's more important to keep that log than it is to worry about what form it's in. Some people want to keep theirs in an Excel spreadsheet. Great. Other people's are want to keep their notes in their, in their app, on their phone, in the notes app. These are all like valid and great ways to keep, to keep notes. Some people like to send emails and use that as a method of note taking. At this particular time, that's a lot of stuff for emails. And the school, that might be a little bit too much, information, download for the school. But any form, that it works for you, I think is the form that you should use. Whether it be one of the forms that you can find online, one of the, a spreadsheet that you make up yourself, or like a notebook, or just your notes app. All of those things, just as long as you do it like every day, every couple of days, how's my child accessing his or her education today, this week? What's changed? Maybe they didn't access it at all. All that stuff is important as well.
CCT.org have been doing some great forms that families can use and download.
Yes, that's right.
We have a couple of questions about ESY. Should I be discussing ESY at a PPT meeting? The answer is yes. And if you need to request a PPT meeting to discuss ESY extended school year, request it. And the next question is, can ESY be virtual? And the answer is yes. We're in that virtual world right now. If it is working, you might want to continue it. If the school is only offering virtual or online ESY services, then you have to make a choice. I have advised some parents that if what the school is offering is not going to be appropriate, and you can find a private provider, a private organization that can meet your child's needs, the ones that are not being covered by the IEP or the online learning, you might want to have a discussion with the school district and see if they would agree to contract directly with that private provider, maybe a summer camp or tutor, and either reimburse you or pay directly the private provider in order to ensure continuity of services and the provision of a free, appropriate public education. Let me have a...
There's a question here. Have you heard of school districts calling police for wellness checks when child are not joining online classes, have not attempted contact with parents prior?
Wow. Well, in the old days before March 17th, attendance at school is mandatory. Otherwise, parents and children could face claims of truancy. And there's a very interesting question that was put in a footnote but never answered by the State Department of Education in the March 24th letter to school districts. Are children attending school? In other words, are these school days or are these, quote, learning days? And I have no idea what a learning day is. But if it's not a school day, then I don't see how a child can be truant. I don't know if schools are taking attendance for online learning the same way they would if your child was physically attending school.
I know that in my district, with my 4 children in high school, they are taking attendance. They did not initially take attendance. I can't remember how many days explicitly, but at least for the first week or 10 days, they did not. But after that period, they have been taking attendance ever since. And I do get emails from teachers if one of my children has not appeared or shown up in class, or even if they have logged in, I actually still have communication from teachers saying, with the video off, with the audio off, are they actually participating? So in my district, attendance is being taken and is being considered.
If your child is not participating in online learning, then you need to document that. For example, I gave at the beginning, talked about a family whose child who has attentional issues cannot be on the computer more than 15, 20 minutes. Document that the child was available, and after 15, 20 minutes, he was no longer participating. It's not like he's skipping school. He's just not able to find the online instruction usable and accessible. And that's where you need to keep records. Christine gave some excellent examples where and how to keep those records. And if it's just taking out a calendar, my child started at 10 o'clock and after 10:15 was no longer available.
Well, Christine says that she has to leave
Okay.
in a moment. Thank you so much, Christine. It's been brilliant talking with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And continuing on with Jane, are there any updates on summer programming from the JCC or camps in general?
So today's a big day. We're waiting for the governor to let us know what additional insight and information he has with regard to the guidelines for summer camps. The JCC summer camp will be happening. It might look different and feel a little bit different to a typical year, but we will be endeavouring to provide summer camp to children both with disabilities and without disabilities. The camp that we do for children that need additional support is called Hand in Hand, and it's for children from pre-K through to 8th or 9th grade, depending upon the child and the needs that they have. We still have positions available for that. Our camp is typically either a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio. So as of now, camp will be functioning. The governor announced a week or so ago that they can commence as of June the 29th. Our camp, Hand in Hand, will begin July the 6th and run through till August the 14th. And the JCC camp for typical campers begins a week prior to that. So as of today, we're waiting to find out if there's any limitation. Right now, the idea is that camp will happen with social distancing protocols in place, with following the guidance from the health department, with masks and so on being utilised. There will be temperature checks taken. There will be waivers completed. The size of the camp groups will be no more than 10 as of right now, but that might change given the guidance that we're waiting for from the governor today. So things are evolving and changing all the time, and the states are trying to keep up with that information and share and relate that to us providers. And today is one of those days.
We have a question. I have an upcoming PPT meeting. Should I be discussing an interim IEP for distance learning to be prepared for the fall if distance learning continues? Or should a schedule be separate from that kind of meeting? In other words, should we schedule an informal meeting? There really isn't an interim IEP. There's either an IEP or there isn't. The IEP that was in effect prior to March 17th, the first official day of the school closings, is the IEP that's in effect right now today. I know there's a debate with some parent advocates who believe that going from in-school learning to online learning was a change of placement. The courts, as far back in 1980, have clearly said that is not a change of placement. So we have binding Court of Appeal decisions saying that's not a change of placement right now today. But if this is going to continue into the fall, into the 2021 school year, that's going to be a different situation because we're writing an IEP for the next school year, and that might be a change of placement. Right now, today, schools are closed at the end of the school year. What's going to happen over the summer, we don't know. We are expecting further guidance from the State Department of Education about ESY or summer programming. And for the fall, we especially don't know. We hear from public health officials one set of information. We look at the California university system. They've suspended fall semester. Everything is online learning. They've already made that decision. how public schools are going to be responding here in Connecticut, the answer is I don't know. But if we do receive information soon from either the federal or state departments of education about continuing the school closures, the public health officials as well in Connecticut, then we should be talking about a brand new, not an interim, but a brand new IEP for the 2021 school year, reflecting that change. In their April 24th, 2020 letter, the State Department of Education has proposed some language for PPT meetings and IEPs, and I'm just going to read it and quote, "This IEP has been developed during the time of school closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The IEP has been developed for implementation within a regular school building and is based on currently available information that will be reviewed within a reasonable period of time once the student is back in the school building. And the team, meaning the PPT, has an opportunity to collect information regarding the school's educational functioning. The district will implement the IEP to the greatest extent possible during school closure." In other words, once schools reopen for the 2021 school year, we may be dealing with in-person, in-class instruction or the possibility of online instruction. But you should be prepared to discuss that, either formally or some school districts are sending out letters. I just saw one earlier today where the school district is saying, this is what we're doing in the interim, and we will update you once we, the school district, have more information about the return to school. So I think we've answered most of the questions today. Jane, is there anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so. Just, you know, next week we should have more information with regard to summer camps and potentially ESY programs. As I said, things are changing daily, if not weekly. But just the main message is to continue to communicate and share with your teachers, the therapists, and the administration of the successes as well as the challenges you're facing during this difficult period.
I want to thank Christine and Jane for participating as panelists in today's discussion, and for all that have joined us as well. We do have webinars next week. We typically have Tuesday evening webinars at 7 p.m. and Friday morning webinars at 10 o'clock like this one. Next Tuesday evening, we're going to be discussing transition programming for the high school students going off to college or wherever they're going after they complete their high school diploma. Our guest will be Jackie Jewett, who's the Director of Transition Services with Carol Frankenberger and Associates. Jackie has been an educational consultant and advocate for over 30 years. Prior to joining Carol Frankenberger and Associates, she was the Managing Director of Outreach for parents and students at Mitchell College and Thames Academy, which is a transition program for students who may be going off to college. We're going to be having a psychologist joining us, Jane and I, to discuss some of the issues families are facing at home. Dr. Robert Kruger is the psychologist, and we'll be giving you more information with our announcements following today's webinar. So it's a beautiful day. I understand we may have some storms later on, so if you have a chance, go outside with your family, enjoy this beautiful day, and I hope that you'll tune in and continue the conversation next week. And before I sign off, I just got another question. Nope, it's just somebody thanking us.
just remember to take time for yourself, as you know, being the parent, potentially the teacher, the educator, the administrator, whatever role you're playing right now. Take a moment for yourself, breathe, because if you can't take care of yourself, it's very difficult to support those around you or those in need. So enjoy the nice warm weather this weekend, hopefully.
Stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope that you will join us next week for next week's webinars. Thank you.
Bye.